welcome to Mitcheldean on this bright early autumn day in the heart of the West Country. You join us in the main assembly shop of this extremely modern and attractive factory just 14 miles due west of Gloucester on the edge of the Forest of Dean. And this leads me to my first question to Mr. Fred Wickstead, the chief executive and therefore the man in charge of the whole Mitcheldean project. Mr. Wickstead, this is perhaps a surprising part of the country to find a plant such as this.
Yes, it is. The reason why you find us here is that we moved here during the early part of the war, shadow factory for Elliott Brothers. Since then, of course, we have been manufacturing precision instruments, photographic equipment, and latterly Xerox. And with Xerox, new buildings. We have a very modern plant here. This modern plant was erected in 1962, and further developments are still going on. However, I think perhaps you may be interested to know the type of building we came to originally.
Yes.
And the original building, which was the old Forest Brewery, is shown there and obviously depicts the type of growth that's taken place at Mitcheldean.
Well, lest there be cries of shame in certain quarters that you should tear down such a splendid building as that old brewery, let's come to the immediate and the importance of your establishment here, because although it's true that the Forest of Dean has an old industrial tradition,
yes,
the forestry colliery is doomed, isn't it?
Yes, the mines are due for closure. Fortunately, this helps us very considerably in the way that there will become labour available, and this means a very definite training program. We have been training for many years. This is being stepped up. We do not only just train craft apprentices, we train technical apprentices and indeed management trainees as well.
So this is of considerable importance to the local economy.
Very definitely, and of course it's very fortunate that we should have this extra labour available to meet this tremendous expansion program at Mitcheldean.
And from your mention of expansion and training, it is obvious that you are here with the intention of staying.
I'm sure so.
Well now, if we are to make the most out of this visit to the factory and the assembly line perhaps in particular, I think it's important first of all that we should understand at least the principles on which this extremely ingenious machine depends. I'm going to show you a couple of things which I'm sure you've all seen many times before, varying numbers of years ago. Iron filings on a piece of paper, on a magnet, and if you tap the paper, you will see that the iron filings assume a very definite pattern, guided by the lines of force, as we know, but remember the pattern. Now, there's another way of inducing an attraction by means of static electricity, a static charge which can be generated in a glass rod by rubbing it vigorously on the conjurer's silk handkerchief. And if you do that, you find that the rod will pick up pieces of paper. Did you see that very brisk movement? Once more, for the benefit of the people at the back. There. Now, if you try this experiment with fine grains of powder, like that, you get a very similar effect. You see the powder clinging to the rod, and that's a perfectly dry rod, no trickery or deception. Now, these particles of powder, which is in fact a dye, are attracted en bloc, in a smudge, as it were. If it were possible to induce a pattern of attraction in this glass rod, as we saw induced with the iron filings, then clearly a copying process might suggest itself. So the problem is to get a pattern instead of a mass attraction. In fact, there is a substance called selenium, which is capable of doing just that when excited by a beam of light. As a photographic plate is chemically excited, selenium is excited in terms of static attraction so that you can attract particles to it. Rather clumsily put, I'm afraid, Mr. Wickstead. But how do you employ this principle in the 813?
Well, it's quite simple, really. We have two drums. On the right, the document drum, which is the drum to receive the document to be copied. From that, we reflect an image up to the object mirror, from the object mirror through the lens, incidentally, quite an intricate and critical lens, through to the image mirror, and from the image mirror onto the Xerox drum. Now, the Xerox drum, as you know, is light sensitive. It attracts the image, and so the document is produced from the ordinary white paper. However, it's not really our job to describe how the machine works, as you know, but to show you how we make it.
Right. Well, then we'll start our visit to the factory without further delay. And since it is your policy to make as much as you can here inside, we'll start with the machine shop.
Well, we make as much as we can on the principle that if we can buy it cheaper than we can make it, then we buy it. Apart from critical items, as far as critical items are concerned, of course, we do have these under our own control.
And down in the machine shop we see the raw materials, presumably?
These are the raw materials we're loading on now, ready for transmission to the main machines. Incidentally, this is a flow line machining shop. Commencing with raw material through the bar machines, through the finishing machines, into the plating shop. You'll see that a little later on. Here is the parting off of the bar. This is an intricate machine costing £12,500, and this actually profile mills in 3 dimensions, and it does it from a template. Not completely automatically, but certainly a certain amount of automation.
There it is following the template?
There it is following the actual template, that's right. This is a shot of an auto screw machine which runs for about 20 hours. Intricate setting, intricate tooling, but economical production and accurate production. This is an interesting shot of a drill actually drilling 108 holes in one casting at one time.
You make it sound very simple.
About a tenth of our previous cost. Very interesting shot here of the 813 shaft, one of the actual shafts off the 813 machine. Here it's coming up after having completed the operation, down the magazine feed, ready for the next machine.
We'll look out for that shaft on the actual production line.
You'll see it on the production line itself. You can see the rate that they're being produced. This is the plating shop, completely automatic. All we do is have 4 ladies to wire up the components or load the jigs, 1 man to actually load the machine and unload the machine. This plant actually plates about 150 square feet of cadmium plating per hour. The components, of course, are quite critical and are maintained to very accurate dimensions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wickstead. We'll be seeing you later. And from the plating shop here to the actual start of the production line on this very corner. And the first object we see is this extremely massive pallet. It's in cast aluminium, but it's still very heavy, as you could see. And the necessity for this extreme rigidity is, I believe, explained when I tell you that these 4 fixing points, location pads, to give them their technical title, on each corner of this foundation are set up to an accuracy, the one against the other, of 1/1000th of an inch. Now that is, of course, far too small a dimension to be discerned by the naked eye, but it, as it were, sets the seal upon the pattern which we shall see all the way down the production line, the insistence upon very, very high degrees of accuracy, small engineering tolerances. Here we see the first step of the assembly. The first of the 3 space plates has been installed in readiness to take sub-assemblies such as this one here. This is one of the drive units, as you can see, and the driving force is still a chain, and a very efficient way of doing it too, when you have got to induce a very precise and very smooth, controlled movement from one component to another. You'll notice the use of nylon in this unit here, and here we see this drive unit already installed on the chassis, one better term. Here is the first of the drums already in position. This actually is the copy drum, the one which carries the original document, as opposed to the Xerox drum, the selenium-coated one, to which the chief executive referred. Notice the production line is mounted, of course, on rollers, as one would expect in a modern plant. The 813 is, of course, powered by electricity. This is self-evident. And here is the main electrical harness, not very high tension, 110 volts, and although it may look very complicated to lay eyes, in fact, it is a simple piece of circuitry. There's nothing electronic about this machine, and this harness, or loom as it is called, is built up here on a pegboard. Again, this is officially unskilled or semi-skilled labor, but it is obviously an extremely skillful business. In fact, it takes a month to train an operator. All the wiring, which you can see surrounding the pegboard, is prefabricated here on the site. It's tagged, a color code is employed for subsequent servicing facility, and indeed for facility on the production line itself. Here we see the harness installed at the base of the machine. This particular operator, who's been here for 5 years, he tells me, takes 25 minutes on his sector of the operation, but this includes not only the installation of the harness there, but also a couple of the mechanical installations as well. Now the machine is really beginning to look like a machine, and a very complicated and intricate one at that. But as I told you, the emphasis at all times is on very, very tight engineering tolerances, measurements in fractions of a thousandth of an inch. And if you're going to run a production line on those standards, then clearly inspection is the key. This is the first of 8 inspection stations. The inspector here checks the torque on the assembly nuts, how tight they are. Even that is of critical importance. And in addition to that, he makes some 70 visual checks to make sure that all the components which should be built in by now are there. And then he keeps a record of this on the card here, which is nicknamed the National Health Card in the factory, because that travels all the way up with the machine and then after dispatch is of course filed. Now, these extremely minute dimensions in setting up call for special apparatus and techniques such as this. This is a fixing or locating jig with dial indicators attached. Each mark on the dial is 1/4 of a thousandth of an inch. To show you what that means, if I slip a piece of paper here between the probe and the piece of steel, the instrument goes mad. You see, that's just the thickness of one piece of paper, as indicated. The practical implication of this is, of course, that the magnification of this measurement enables the operator to make these minute movements at a glance without any special optical instruments. Here we see the octopus, as it's called, a locating jig set up. The purpose of all this is to set up the component parts most accurately in position, the one against the other. For instance, this particular operation is concerned with setting up the height of the tray which carries the copy paper. Obviously, as the stack is reduced, as the paper is taken off most delicately, one sheet at a time, you have to have a very accurately positioned base from which to make your calculations. The gentleman on the left of your screen here with a dark collar, one of the trainees, which Mr. Wickstead mentioned. However, if we go on, we will see another example here of the technique of measurement. Whereas the last probes on that mouse jig were in physical contact with the components, here it is a pneumatic connection, if you like. The actual sensors are located on the machine here. Pressure air lines lead back to these columns, rather appropriately called Slim Jims, and I can show you how this works very simply. Here is the probe, which is in location on that machine, and if I just touch it as delicately as I can with my finger, you will see this very large movement of the indicator responding to the air pressure on the column. Again, an ingenious and modern approach to location and positive measurement, dealing all the time in these questions of fractions of a thousandth of an inch. However, if it comes to optics, anyone who's done any experiments in the old days of heat, light and sound will know how accurate you have to be in setting up apparatus of this kind. Now, this device here has been developed in order to set up the optical head You remember the two mirrors and the lens, which Mr. Wickstead showed us on his diagram. Well, we can show you a close-up of that here. There it is. You see the lens in the center and the two mirrors on either end. And you remember the chief executive said that this was a pretty critical lens. In actual fact, they have 50,000th of an inch to play with, but they set that head up to an accuracy of plus or minus 5 thou. And there again you can see the operator doing that with a purely visual system. When she looks through the instrument, she has a sort of hairline sight, rather like a gun sight, but immensely accurate, of course. This, I think, may be the most exciting station on the line. This is where we see if the machine actually works, and needless to say, it does. It runs with an efficiency and a beauty of movement, I think, which must enchant any mechanical eye. You see the drives, the beautifully sintered gear wheels here, little chain drives, the belted rubber drive, and this first lubrication being applied with a specially developed lubricant grease. The thing is indeed built like a watch. But here, finally, we come to the very heart of the matter. It takes 6.5 hours, incidentally, from the naked pallet to here, but needless to say, there are many more hours beyond this station of inspection and testing before the machine is ready for dispatch. But this is the very heart of the matter. This is the light source, which Mr. Wickstead showed us in his diagram, which is focused first onto the copy, and the image of which is then transferred to the selenium or the Xerox drum to produce the copy. Well, now, the only way to find out if a copying machine will copy is to insert an original and see what comes out. The proof of the proverbial pudding. And again, we can see that the drum rotating here as the copy is made, and just beyond it, the very fine web, which is part of the cleaning process, which is, of course, an essential ingredient of reproduction. Now, this machine then set up to these extraordinarily fine engineering tolerances, fractions of 1,000th of an inch in a degree, a capability of 125 lines to the inch in reproduction, definition, thank you. And here we have the first off, an appropriate message instead of the usual test card, which is run at this time. Well, there then we bring you pretty well up to date, I think, on the story of the 813. But as you've heard, there's a very strong emphasis on the future here. And just beyond the windows of this main assembly shop, there is, well, not quite concrete evidence of this, but very practical evidence. The bulldozers at work on a site of just over 20 acres, immediately adjacent to the factory. The earth-moving machines will have completed their job by next spring, and the first building will be operational by the summer of the following year. There then the future, but there is one all-important aspect of the operation here, packaging, obviously of major importance with a piece of apparatus such as this machine is, and dispatch. Well, immediately below us is a warehouse and a dispatch bay, where, as you can see at this time, a very considerable reserve of 813s is being built up. There are over 200 down there, I happen to know at this time, in readiness for a mass onslaught upon the markets of the world. Mechanical handling used whenever possible. That wasn't a deliberate mystery shot, just in case you thought those packages were coming entirely without human assistance. Forklift truck, which loads 4 units at a time straight into the company's own lorries. Naturally, they have their own fleet of road transport. Speedily loaded and dispatched from this quiet corner of Gloucestershire, with now such an important and exciting industrial future ahead of it. Away roll the trucks. Already now they're quite a familiar sight on the roads of the county and elsewhere on their journeys from here to the ports and the airports and finally to destinations all over the world, because at the moment a reserve of machines is being built up to stock showrooms, service stations, instruction schools the world over before the major sales campaign is launched. Thus then, the story of the Rank Xerox 813, a machine of fascinating ingenuity and remarkable technical and practical achievement, a machine intended for the markets of the world and capable of making its own significant contribution to the ever-increasing demands of modern communication.
Taken you on this rather unusual television excursion, when some of you have perhaps seen for the first time what we are doing at our factory. We're now going to offer you television with a difference. For here is a unique opportunity for you, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions through the medium of television. And I hope, linked up again, the answers will be supplied by a panel which is waiting now at Mitcheldean. So if we're all set, over to you again, Mr. Raymond Baxter. A microphone will be circulating here for the
Once
questions.
again to Mitcheldean, and this unique opportunity for you, the television audience, to have a crack at us on the other side of the camera. I'm not quite sure what my personal reaction to this is, but in any case, it's not my responsibility at all, except to introduce you at once to the panel who will be most happy to receive your questions. First of all, Mr. Stan Pratt, the Chief Engineer. In the center, Mr. Fred Wickstead, the Chief Executive of Mitcheldean, whom you've already met. And nearest to me, Mr. Jeremy Henwood, one of the product managers who is responsible for the planning of this production line in conjunction with Chief Executive, of course. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there they stand like the burghers of Calais with their halters round their necks. So may we have the first question from the Dorchester, please?
We have the first question, please. Surely somebody would like to ask a question. Over on the right, I think, again. Gentlemen, please stand up.
The 914 has a habit of, when say gets catching fire, getting overheated, causing the cartridge to charge. Slightly impacts the 813, and if so, will it affect the original?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. I wonder if they'd mind repeating it, please.
The 914 has a habit of catching fire or overheating, and therefore in this machine, is this likely to happen? And if so, will it affect the original document?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm sure some of the salesmen will be only too pleased to give you an appropriate answer to it. From a technical point of view, there are very different heating elements in the 813, and we do not envisage any trouble at all in this respect.
What about another question? Microphone, please. Will you please stand up, sir?
Thank you.
Here.
When could one expect delivery of this machine?
Did you get that one?
No.
The question is, when can one expect delivery of this machine?
Well, again, the questions seem to be slanted at me rather than the technical people. However, we are, of course, already delivering them. As to when you can get one, may I suggest you go along and see the sales department?
Are there any more questions, please?
Couldn't hear that.
Please stand up. Mr. Arizona.
I understand that there's a 6% reduction in the copy that is made. Why is this necessary?
Stan?
The prime reason for requiring a reduction is to make completely certain that important information that may be close to the edges of the original is completely copied on the reproduction.
Next question, please. Microphone, please, down here. Will you stand up, sir, please? There's the microphone.
Mr. Wickstead, we've seen the remarkable technical skills required of the people of Gloucestershire in producing this excellent machine, this forward-looking machine, as it were. Would you like to comment on their aptitude as to your particular training program? We understand it doesn't take too long to learn this, but would you like to comment on their aptitude in adapting themselves to this particular industrial process?
Certainly. Well, first of all, as far as aptitude is concerned, this does vary very considerably on the type of job that we expect the operator to do. Our training may vary from as little as 2 weeks for a trainee of a drilling machine or a simple turning operation to 5 years for a technical apprentice, followed by another 3 years of management training. Perhaps Jerry Henwood, who is much closer to the floor than I am, may care to say just a few words about how he finds these new operators and how he trains them actually on the assembly floor. Jerry.
Well, we start off by trying to grade people into the type of job they're going to do, and this obviously takes a few weeks, especially on people going onto the actual production line. We normally try to get people assessed by putting them on a smaller sub-assembly and judging their performance on that before putting them actually on the production line. Other people, mainly on the females, which we use mainly on sub-assemblies, these are normally pretty good. A girl from 16 up to 30 usually picks this up very quickly, and we haven't had a lot of problems so far.
Perhaps I could just come in again here and say that, of course, apart from the training that we give them in the actual factory itself, quite a lot of time is spent at the local technical college, and because of our influence on this rural area, they do in fact set up special courses for us.
Could I interrupt a moment, gentlemen? I feel it only fair to point out that Jeremy here speaks with some bias in favour of local ladies in view of the fact that he's married to one.
Any more questions? A gentleman here, I think.
Mr. Wickstead, I wonder if you can tell me to what extent you've managed to get the bugs out of the new machine. My organisation has operated a 914 for 18 months, and whilst we find this almost invaluable, we are still getting more calls from the service engineer than we would like. And I just wondered to what extent we're going to get the same problem on the 813.
Yes, well, first of all, I think you would be in the minority if in fact you are getting rather more service calls than what you used to get. Let me say that very definite and very accurate records are maintained to see how the quality is progressing. We take very definite checks about the number of calls. However, let me now revert from the 914 and talk to you about the 813. The 813, as I think you heard our chairman say, has been on the anvil, so we say, for some years. We at Mitcheldean have in fact been testing them in our laboratories for some considerable time, may I say well over 12 months. In fact, of course, we have been producing them for some months, and we have been trying these out in actual field locations, not just in laboratories. I don't think you will have any major problems with the 813. One never says you will not, because I'm not a salesman, I'm an engineer.
Next question, please.
Mr. Wickstead, we've heard from Mr. John Davis the expansion program which you plan for this Mitcheldean factory. Could you outline it from your point of view? How many workers will you take on, in fact? This is a particular interest to Gloucestershire people. I'm sure they would like to know this morning or this afternoon, you know, what you plan for Mitcheldean.
Yes, well, as far as Mitcheldean is concerned, we have gone up very considerably in the past 3 years. And as far as the future developments are concerned, we know that we're going to go up again very considerably in the next 3 or 4 years. We are currently between 1,500–1,600 people here, and I envisage that in the next 12 months the figure will be up to 1,800, and knowing what the possibilities are of additional labour in this area, I don't see any trouble at all in going up to 2,250 in the not too distant future.
I believe the gentleman over here would like to ask a question. There you are, sir. The microphone's behind you.
Mr. Wickstead, in the case of the 914, for the use of the 914, you can remove the drum and polish it. It's expected to do so once a week or every 5,000 copies. It's a comparatively easy operation, and it's carried out by girls in my organization who were shown how to do it by your people. Is the removal of the drum and the cleaning of the drum of the same simplicity in the 813?
Yes, it is, but perhaps Jerry would like to say just a few more words on this.
Yes, well, the cleaning method in this machine, the 813, is that the drum is cleaned by a web. This web is very easily cleaned. This web is very easily changed. It's less than one change in 1,500 copies. The actual change itself can be done in less than 2 minutes, so the time is much less than changing or taking the drum out on the 914, wiping it clean and replacing it. It is far simpler on the 813 or 813.
If I may just add to that question, the fact of the matter is that it is not necessary to remove the drum for cleaning on the 813 as it is on the 914, but we can talk about that later if you like. Any more questions for Mitcheldean? One down the front here, Kathy, I think.
As a very satisfied user of the 914, I would like to know what are the capabilities of the 813 in comparison to the 914 with a particular aspect of paper sizes and the refill of the drums.
Stan, would you like to take this one? Did you hear it?
I didn't hear the last part of the question. I'll answer the first part. So far as paper size is concerned, the 813 is designed to accommodate a range of copy paper from 8 by 10 inches up to 8.5 by 13. The input size, original size, is up to a maximum of 9 by 14 inches. There is no practical minimum because a carrier is provided in which an original as small as a postage stamp could be inserted. If the questioner would like to repeat the last part of the question, I'll try and answer it.
What would be the capabilities of the paper tray of the 813 as compared to the 914?
The capacity of the 813 paper tray is 200 sheets. I'm sorry I can't tell you what the 914 holds. think it's a little more.
It is, in fact, a little more.
Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen, in London. We come to the end of our live transmission from Mitcheldean for two basic reasons. A, because you've had a fair crack at the whip and this was the last question, and also because our electronic link between Mitcheldean here and London is about to be terminated. And one further consideration, I'm sure you're all very hungry for your lunch, and we've had a pretty harrowing morning and could do with a salutation to the immortal memory of the building which stood here before. It but remains for me, on your behalf, to thank our panel of experts very kindly for putting up with our incursion upon their privacy, for answering your questions so ably, and our thanks to you too for being such a very responsive audience, albeit by remote control. From all of us here in Mitcheldean, goodbye.
Well, thank you, Mr. Raymond Baxter in Mitcheldean. And I would like to say on behalf of Rank Xerox and Rank Organization, we're very much indebted to the GPO engineers who have worked so hard to make that link possible. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that completes the closed-circuit television question and answer session. I'm sure that our chairman and my colleagues here on the stage will be only too pleased to answer any further questions you may have before we adjourn for lunch.